In this video, I'm going to demonstrate how to build a data source that will serve as a calendar table using Tableau Prep in a single Excel file. Using Tableau Prep in a single Excel file as a source, with the Excel file containing two values and a single attribute. So our single attributes can be a calendar year attributes, and really it can be anything. Just for sensibility and clarity, I've named this attribute calendar year within my Excel file. And that attribute has two rows, or two values, January 1st, 2020 and January 1st, 2025. These two values represent the start and end year values for which I want to generate date values for. Using Tableau's feature to generate rows, I can use those two values to generate one row per date value that exists between January 1st, 2020 and January 1st, 2025, excluding the right endpoint of January 1st, 2025. In other words, I'm going to generate one row per day existing in years 2020, 2021, 2022, 2023, and 2024. This feature is pretty neat in the sense that it recognizes that this is a date value, this attribute's a date value, and it allows me to make use of those two values in my Excel file, right? To generate those date values, I'm going to specify that the starting value is the minimum value and the end value is the maximum value. And those are the only two values technically in my data source, but it's going to nonetheless determine which one's the min and max. And the way we're going to go about doing this is we're going to use this feature and specify the means of incrementing, right? So do I want to, for every date value generated, do I want to add 1 month to it? No, I want to add 1 day. So starting with January 1st, 2020, I want to continuously add 1 day to the next row. So I start with January 1st, 2020, which is the value that exists in my Excel file. I generate one row, and that generates January 2nd, 2020. I then add one more day to that, generates January 3rd, 2020, and so on. And that process will continue all the way until the end of 2024. And these are our calendar date values, right? So we specified we want to generate a calendar table or data source that contains dates January 1st of 2024 through and including December 31st, 2024. Excuse me, that's January 1st, 2020 through December 31st, 2024. So we have our date values, but what we're missing are the key components, which are those attributes that describe each of these date values. This alone is not entirely useful, right? It just isn't by itself. So what we need to do is we need to use Tableau Prep's calculations or calculated fields to derive attributes to create a complete calendar table that is useful. And the attributes I've included in here are things such as calendar week, calendar month, month number, week number, day of the year number, and so forth. And I've went about doing this again using calculated fields, so various functions and calculations to derive these attributes. Now for many of these attributes, there's a variety of ways to go about doing it, or achieving or getting the same outcome, getting the same value. So when you look at these, you may notice, hey, I'd probably do this a different way, and that's completely fine. For others, there's most likely only a single way to go about getting the same value derived from the calendar date value. So we have our derived fields, and this completes our calendar table, right? This is the data we want to be able to reference and use. Now, we've derived those, and we can now write this to an Excel. I'm going to demonstrate that you can write this to an Excel, but that's really not what you want to do here. This is just to showcase that this does work, right? So I'm going to write this to an Excel file, and it's going to run pretty quickly, right? So if I hit run, it's going to write to the location I've specified, and it's going to run or generate the date values from 2020 through 2025, excluding the 1st of 2025. So I'm going to run this. It's going to take about a second, and then just to showcase that this is working, let's go and let's look at the actual output file that was just generated. And that output file looks like this. So it looks identical to the data preview that we saw in prep, right? So it looks just like this. So we know that it's successfully executed, and even more so, we know it's successfully executed because it contains all of the date values that we are expecting, all the way up to and including December 31st, 2024. Now, I wrote that to an Excel file, but what do we really want to do here? We want this to actually be a published data source, right? I mean, if you're working in isolation, it's just you. Sure, this could be useful, but what you really wouldn't want this to be an Excel file. You'd rather want it to be a published data source, right? So a published data source that is going to sit on your server, or some type of just a data source that's like a TDS file that sits on your desktop. We really wouldn't want this to just sit here, right? I would want the file to be a Tableau data extract, a hyper extract, or I would want to publish this to my server. And the best, to get the most bang for your buck on this, if you will, is if you publish this to your server so that other people can consume this, right? Ideally, you would have something like this, and I actually tabbed into this diagram earlier. I gave you a sneak peek into it, but ideally, you want something like this. You want a Tableau Prep flow that generates your calendar data, right? It builds a published data source that acts as a calendar table, and then from that calendar table, you want people to use it, right? You want people to consume the data and reference that data source. So what we'll have here is we'll have people building prep flows or developing extracts that reference that data source. And then from those prep flows that other users are developing, or maybe you're developing, other data sources will be published. And then from those data sources, you'll have workbooks that make use of the data that's published here, but upstream made use of your calendar table. This is the ideal situation for which all of these objects here, the root of the calendar data is here, the single data source that you produced, right? So on your Tableau server, you may or may not be surprised at how quickly things can get out of hand when everybody is generating their own calendar table, right? And that's not what you want. You don't want you want a single version of the truth here. You want everybody to be referencing the same published data source. And this diagram illustrates that, right? We don't want to have 10 different calendar tables and then one Tableau Prep flow designed by one user sourcing from here, and then maybe another prep flow sourcing from somebody else's calendar table. And then you have various workbooks making use of different versions of the calendar table, right? Or calendar data that's been generated by those data sources. This is what you want here. You want to be in this situation to which everything branches from this calendar table. Now, why I've talked about generating calendar data and a published data source more or less on your Tableau server, so you can share this data source with the server's users. But why do we need this? Well, we've also talked about it helps you describe each calendar date value. That's a given. But for reporting purposes, it allows us to more easily answer questions, right? It allows us to, given our data that has maybe just a date value, right? Our pre-existing sales data that just has a single date value. It allows us to join to that published data source that's our calendar, our calendar data source, and answer questions like, very easily answer questions, how much sales were generated in Q4? How much time was required to process and ship each order excluding weekends, right? Because in our calendar table, going back to our calendar table, we have a flag that says, hey, this is a weekend or it's a weekday. And in instances where you want to exclude weekends, say that you have let's just say, for example, the people that process and ship each order, they don't work weekends. So we don't want to inflate our time to ship numbers or our time to process and ship numbers. We don't want to drag those averages up by including weekends. It just doesn't make sense. They don't work, right? So we can use this calendar table to assist in identifying and excluding those weekends from each start and end point of that process, right? This is the dates the order is submitted and the processing begins to the date that it's shipped. And then we exclude the weekends. And another question such as, do sales tend to vary throughout each week, or are they steady? So do you have sales, do you generally have sales picking up later on in the week, say Thursday and Friday, or sales more, or sales more active, or customers more active during the first couple of days of the week, or perhaps maybe there's a single day in the week that customers are most active, among others. So this is why you'd want a calendar table. Again, just going back through the prep flow, very easy to build this. You literally just need an Excel file with 2 values in it and a header. You can technically get away with the header, but I would encourage you to put it in there just in case people don't exactly know what's going on here. Having a header that reads as calendar year is pretty helpful, because then the user knows that you have populated the start and end point here for your date range, and to generate those rows between those 2 points. So that's one method. And just as a bonus here, let's just say you're using Tableau Server, you have access to Tableau Server, and you are going with the optimal route of publishing this output to Tableau Server as a published data source for other server users to make use of. There's another way you can go about this that makes it more dynamic. In this solution here, we've hard-coded these values in that Excel file. If I ever want to generate a calendar that expands, through more years, or moves forward, or let's just say it contracts, we only want 1 year instead of 4 years, or we want 20 years. Well, we can parameterize this flow. So in this version of the flow, I've parameterized the start and end year. And the way this works is I have an Excel file again, right? And I have an Excel file with one attribute, and I've called that parameters. And the 2 values within that attribute are start year and end year. And this could be anything, really. It could be apple and banana, technically. It doesn't really matter. I just need 2 placeholders, so this parameterization will work. The way this works is I've created a calculated field here that says if the row in the parameters column reads a start year, then make a date value consisting of the start year, which is parameterized, right? So a user can populate the start year, which is going to be an integer value. When it's the end year, so when it reads as end year, then also make a dates value and have that year value for that date, right? So make date accepts 3 arguments, the year, day, and month, and it's year, month, and days, apologies. Accepts 3 arguments, and you'll pass those in. But these 2 are parameterized, right? So these 2 are the 2 things that people on Tableau Server can adjust, right? So if I want to make my calendar to cover 20 years worth of data, let's just say 2024 through 2044, well, I can, as the start year here, I can specify that I want to start on 2024 and go through 2045, because we're going to be excluding the right endpoint. So these are the parameters, and that's basically how it works. It's just a simple case statement that allows you to parameterize your start and end point. And that parameterization, that parameterized field, is going to be used in here, right? So it's going to be used when we're generating those day values. And because I've set the parameter to be, well, let's just check what I have it as. I have 2020 through 2025. If I want to, again, do 20 years, let's just do 2020 through 2040. Well, I'm going to add that in there and set that. And now we're going to see that, hey, this is going to generate a ton of data. So if I scroll all the way down, we got through 2024. And let me refresh this. View and flow. So we're good there. So let's see what's going on here. How can I get this to, let's refresh this. Let's refresh that. So we see that this is 2040 now, because I've parameterized this start and end point. Now when we go to generate day, we should start to see, right? So now I can see that this is generating those expected row values. So it's generating 73,000, so 7305 rows. Not 73,000, but 7305. Notice we're going from 2020 through 2040, but not including the first of 2040. So this is as expected, and it's based on, again, the parameterized fields that we've used from the Excel file, right? These 2 things, they could be A and B, apple and banana, but just for clarity and understanding, right? Understanding, how this prep flow works, and this flow, the flow in general. I've used the appropriate values of start year and end year. So we have one row per date value existing between those two endpoints, and the derived fields or the attributes are the same as the previous example. I'm using a handful of calculated fields to derive the attributes that I find useful for a calendar table. Again, these could be different for you. What's important to you or what's useful to you depends on your analysis and the data you're working with. But these, again, are the ones that I'm using. So when we publish this to a Tableau server, right? If I publish this to a Tableau server, it's going to give the ability every time a user runs the flow, right? You can set a default, which could be these 2020 through 2040, which is going to be the calendar table generated, or you can give people the ability, again, not or, but people will have the ability to type in something different, right? 2025 at runtime. So whenever they click run, they're going to be prompted, hey, give me the start year and end year values. And then based on that user input, it's going to generate one row per date value between those endpoints, excluding the write endpoints. So we would publish this to the server, and people would be able to make use of it, and it'd be dynamic. The pro to this, right? So why would you want to make this, why would you want to parameterize this flow instead of having static hard-coded values? Well, if you ever want to make an update to the flow, so if you want to change the date range, well, you'd have to pull down the flow, update the Excel file, republish, and run. That is assuming that you are not allowing people to edit flows on the Tableau server. So if you aren't allowing people to edit the flow on the Tableau server, well, you can't even edit the Excel file by itself, so it still applies. You'd have to pull it down and republish. You'd have to republish with the embedded file, that embedded Excel file with the two new dates. So if I wanted to expand this date range from 2020 and go all the way to 2030, I'd have to pull down the flow, update the Excel file that's embedded in the flow, republish, and run. And then people would have access to the calendar data that goes through 2030. With this solution here, you don't have to pull down the flow because we've parameterized it. At runtime, when you click run on Tableau server, it's going to ask you for those two endpoints and then generate the data based on the specified endpoints. And that's why this, in my opinion, is the superior solution. It's a really neat hack to allowing you to dynamically generate calendar data without having to pull down the flow. That is it for this video. I hope you learned something new. If you enjoyed this video, please remember to like the video and subscribe to my channel for notifications. Thank you, and see you next time.